I particularly first want to touch on what Sachi was saying, because what underlies all good storytelling is actually listening and noticing, right? So sometimes I think people forget that to be a good storyteller, you also have to be a good listener. But all of you, as sustainability leaders who are creating these beautiful projects within your communities, you all know that you have to listen to your communities. You have to listen to your stakeholders before you can ever create a project, right? So you've already noticed a need. So you're all good noticers. Just by the fact that you're even here, you've noticed a need. So you've been looking. So I invite you to continue honing that skill, hone that noticing, hone that listening skill, paying attention to what's happening, and what people are saying. So those are both incredibly important, listening, noticing. The other thing that Sachi said, which I think is really important, is compassion. And I have to quote this. I have to quote what you said, Sachi, because I'm going to come back to this in other situations. She said, "You're trying to touch their soft corners deeply." God, isn't that a beautiful sentence? I love that sentence so much. What does that mean? Touching their soft corners deeply. You're listening to what the need is. That soft corner is a vulnerability, right? That soft corner is where they're vulnerable. So on the one hand, you're listening and watching for that soft corner because that's what you're trying to help, right? Your project is trying to address that need that they have, that vulnerability. But the second part is that soft corner is where you're going to get them interested, right? That soft corner is the place that they are going to respond to you from. Like we said in the beginning, a good story has emotion in it because people respond to emotion with emotion. And that's what motivates them. So I love that. And so here's another thing. So this is something that Haji brought up. Being a compelling communicator. Now, not all of us are necessarily great public speakers, right? It's not easy for everybody to be a great public speaker. And it is true that when you are selling your project, and you understand what I mean by the word selling, you are presenting, you are trying to get people motivated to invest emotionally, sometimes financially, in your project. And so at some point, you are going to have to get up in front of people and present. Now, I know that as you go along in the UPG program, you're going to be learning a lot about public speaking. So the good news is we don't have to learn that today because you're going to have so many opportunities to practice it. But what you're going to find is that you're going to learn how to communicate effectively over the course of this program. I believe that you are going to learn how to communicate effectively. And being a compelling communicator is being a good storyteller. And you're going to use the elements of story to help you become a more compelling communicator. And how you communicate your project, it's the key to creating community support. right? You're trying to create community support for your project, because without community support, without support from your stakeholders, without investment from your stakeholders, your project won't go anywhere. So you're using your communication, your story, to create community support and to attract the investment. Now, what do I mean by attracting investment? Obviously, I mean attracting financial investment, because sometimes you're going to need to attract financial investment. But you're going to need to attract emotional investment. And so one of the ways in which we attract emotional investment in our projects is by inspiring others with our own emotional investment. So one thing I've seen a lot when I've worked with sustainability leaders in past years, you guys know a lot. You are very often experts in your field, and you're all just super impressive. It's amazing how impressive you are. And sometimes when you've been communicating your projects, I've noticed that many of you really get in there with like how much you know, and really get in there with your expertise. And people might be impressed with your expertise for about 5 seconds. But what's going to stick with them is how you've touched them. And the way you're going to touch them is with your own emotional investment in your project. So that means both your passion that you bring to communicating your project, and it's going to mean your own emotional journey in creating this project. Like, that's going to be an important piece in how you communicate it and in attracting emotional investment in other people. So a couple of people, not just in the storyteller question I asked, but earlier on, lots of people talked about audience. Now, audience, that's a fantastic subject. We could have a whole class on audience, because your audience is at the heart. Those are the people at the heart of your project, right? In so many ways, you're going to be talking about your projects in front of many different audiences. And so it's important that you know your audience, because that is going to determine how you tell your story, right? You are not going to tell the same story to a group of economists that you're trying to impress to get, financial backing or something. That's going to be one story that you tell. And then another story you might tell is for the people who you're trying to help. Now, there's going to be great overlap between the way you tell those stories, right? Obviously, you're not changing everything. But for the economists, you might be adding a little bit more of your expertise. You might bring a little bit more of your expertise to the story. You might bring a little bit more statistics. You might bring some more numbers, some more sort of hard proof, right? Because you're listening to, engaging with and paying attention to who your audience is. Now, if your project is with school children and you're trying to engage school children, well, obviously, maybe leave the statistics at home, right? You might be an expert on statistics, but that's not going to help you in crafting a story that school children are going to engage with. So it's understanding your audience is really important, and knowing who your audience is. So you have to ask that question: who is my audience today? Who am I telling my story to today? And how is that going to affect how I communicate my story? So when you're thinking about that, I think this gets back to the soft corners thing that Sachi was talking about, is you ask the question about your audience: what are their needs? What are their dreams? What are their interests? What's their background? Someone mentioned culture. Yes, culture is going to play a role in how you tell your story and and how they hear your story, how they receive your story. So you're going to tailor your story and, very importantly, your medium of your story to your audience. So again, as an example, if you're tailoring the story you're telling of your project to a bunch of economists, you're going to bring the graphs, you're going to bring the bar charts, you're going to bring the pie charts, you know, you're going to give them what they need to see to invest in your project. But if they, for example, if the people you are talking to don't have internet, then online stories aren't going to help them, right? If you're talking to school children, the medium is going to be super important. It's going to be about music. It's going to be about images. It's going to be about games. It's going to be about dance, right? So your medium, the medium in which you tell your story, is going to have to be tailored to your audience. And so you have to ask yourself these questions about who is my audience today, because it's going to change, right? And so the mediums that you can use for storytelling are endless, right? I mean, you all know this: music, dance, images, cartoons, video, personal anecdote, as we've been talking about, super important. So the medium you use is only limited by two things: your imagination and your audience, right? The needs of your audience and your own imagination and project. So I am going to invite you, and there are a couple other things I want to talk about before we open up to Q&A. So when you're designing the story of your project, I want to invite you to ask yourself some questions. So, and I'm going to connect them to the elements of story, these questions. So what's the issue I'm addressing? What's specifically at stake, right? So the elements of story there are struggle. What's the struggle that my project addresses? And specificity. What is the specific issue and what is at stake for these people? Who is the issue affecting and how is it affecting them? So that's the people at the heart of your story. That's emotions. How is it affecting the people? And how has it affected you personally, right? And again, that's specific. How will my project help address this issue? And how can the community participate specifically? Those two questions are very much centered around the idea of hope. But again, hope as a concrete thing, not hope as kind of a concept, but really hope. What will my project specifically do to address this issue? And how can the community participate? How can my audience be a part of this? That gives people hope to know that there's an opening for them. And then here's another question. What led me to want to do this project? So I often ask people the question, where's the heat? What I mean by that, where's the heat for you? What made you interested in doing this project in the first place? It's important that you know why you're doing something, what got you there, what was the passion for you? Because your passion, your experience is going to invite other people to be passionate and contribute their experience to your project. And then another question you can ask is, how can I use my imagination to craft my project? So this is another thing that social change and storytelling have in common. They are both acts of imagination. right? You're asking, what if? What if we did this together, right? And when you're telling a story, you're asking, what if this happened? What would happen then? What would happen next? Right? So social change and storytelling are both acts of imagination, of imagining what if, and in giving a possible form to the future. Your story actually creates a possible future. Every time you tell your story, you're creating a possible future that people can relate to. Give hope. You can give hope to them that they can participate in that future. So we've already talked about this next thing a little bit, facts, figures, and your story. So someone mentioned proof. I can't remember who it was who said something about proof. Can't quite remember, but one of you quite wonderfully said, when you're telling a story, you need proof, right? You need concrete facts. You need it to be a true story. And that is true. But there is a specific relationship between facts and the story that you're telling. It's a great strength that you have facts on your side. You need to have facts, right? You can't be telling untruths about how things are. You need to be truthful. But it's not enough, I'm afraid, for a couple of reasons. Your project is up against a lot of obstacles, some really big things. So one of the things your project is up against is noise. The sheer amount of information and the number of stories bombarding people in the internet age every day is massive. Your story is up against that noise, right? The second things are mis and disinformation. Those are two separate things, right? Misinformation is innocent. Misinformation is just somebody got something wrong, something spread, it was wrong, it's a mistake. Disinformation is the willful spreading of wrong information to serve an agenda, right? You're up against that too. So you have to have a pretty strong story, a pretty compelling story to cut through noise, mis and disinformation. So you need facts and figures to base your projects on and to measure their success. Of course, you all know that. You're professionals, you're experts. But when you're communicating your project, you need emotions and imagination as much as you need those facts and figures. So, because most people, as I said, don't respond to tables and statistics. They're responding to emotions, images, music, your story. And then, so two very small things. One is try to keep it simple, right? We have a tendency to overcomplicate when we're telling stories. You want to boil down the story of your project. I love that you guys are doing your 60-second pitches because there's only so much you can say in 60 seconds. That's fantastic. The more you hone those 60-second pitches, the more you realize you're going to boil it down to the most important things. These are the things I want to say in those 60 seconds. So you want to keep it simple. You don't want to overcomplicate it. The second thing is you want to avoid using what I call sustainability speak or economic speak. You tell the story of your project using simple, clear language. Most of the stakeholders that you're telling your story to are not going to want to hear sustainability speak or economic speak. You want to talk to them as one human being to another, right? So you do that using clear, simple language with passion. And this is the most important thing, really. Your aim in doing these projects and in telling the story of your project is not to impress anybody. Your aim is to create connection. And that's it. And I mean that very literally. Ego, and we all have a tendency to want to seem impressive. It's more important to connect with somebody. And sometimes that means you have to be vulnerable too, right? When you're telling your story. And that's where you mine your own life to help you tell the story of your project. It's going to help people relate, but it's also going to be a source of strength for you, remembering your story, why you came to this project, why you're doing this in the first place, why are you telling this story? Like, that's going to be a source of strength for you, because when it gets hard, sometimes you're going to want to quit. And your own story is what you have. Why you are doing this project, why you showed up in the first place. Okay, so with that, I want to open the floor to questions, because I know you have them. I see them all. I see those hands, and I love it. So let's get into some questions.
Okay. I think we can start with Danielle. Please forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Okay.